Welcome, viewers. Today we explore a harsh, ancient world. The prize of freedom became a dark fight to survive. Days ago, millions cheered as the mighty sea parted, destroying an empire and breaking their chains. But that sweet victory vanished. They marched straight into a barren, scorching desert with no end in sight. Under the blazing sun, water supplies dried up. Stale bread turned to mold, and children cried from severe thirst. Driven mad by hunger, a fierce rebellion began. Could Moses save them, or would they all perish in the sand? The vast wilderness of sin offered no mercy. Endless dunes of red sand stretched as far as the eye could see. Millions of weary refugees dragged their heavy feet. The scorching wind burned their skin and blinded their tired eyes. Ancient records tell us they carried meager supplies. Those small rations quickly vanished in the brutal heat. Stately bronze pots from Egypt now hung completely empty. Leather water flasks shriveled up like dead, fallen leaves. Mothers wept silently as they held their frail babies. There was absolutely nothing left to soothe their deep pain. Strong men collapsed onto the scorching desert floor. Their cracked lips bled as they gasped for a single drop of rain. Even the sturdy livestock surrendered to the harsh sun. Herds of sheep and cattle lay dying across the wasteland. Despair crept through the massive camp like a shadowy plague. Hope faded faster than the shadows at the end of day. The great prophet Moses walked among his broken people. His heavy heart shattered at the sight of their immense grief. He gripped his wooden staff to steady his weary steps. It was a humble symbol of power in a bleak land. Human nature is frail when facing a certain doom. Survival instincts quickly crushed their newly discovered faith. Whispers of rebellion quickly spread through the quiet tents. The starving crowd forgot the magic wonders they had seen. Anger is deadly when fueled by an empty stomach. The desperate people gathered in massive, angry swarms. They circled Moses, with faces twisted by raw, pure fury. Loud voices accused him of planning a very deadly trap. "Why did you drag us out of Egypt?" they loudly screamed. "We had pots of meat and bread to satisfy our hunger." History reveals a dark and truly tragic irony. They preferred chains over the brutal cost of true freedom. Heavy stones were lifted as violence threatened to erupt. The leader stood alone against the massive, angry mob. What would you do if your people turned against you today? Would you fight back, or seek a much higher, divine power? Moses did not strike back at his ungrateful, angry flock. He fell to his knees on the burning, sun-baked desert sand. He bowed his tired head down to the lowest possible point. The commander became a humble servant in distress. "What shall I do with these people?" he cried to the heavens. "They are ready to stone me to deadly ruin right now." According to ancient texts, the Lord heard his desperate plea. A divine response was prepared for the rebellious crowd. The Creator did not answer with punishing lightning strikes. He chose to conquer their bitter doubt with a wondrous grace. As the burning sun began to set over the horizon, a massive dark cloud approached the desolate campsite. It was not a storm, but a giant flock of migrating quails. Millions of birds landed, covering the valley floor tonight. Fresh meat became abundant for every starving family. Roaring fires were lit, and the wondrous sweet smell arose. Hunger was satisfied, but the burning deep thirst remained. They still had to survive the bitterly cold desert night. When dawn arrived, a strange, thick mist blanketed the vast camp. As the dew evaporated, a wonder was revealed. The dry, rocky ground was covered with fine, pure white little flakes. It looked exactly like a glittering layer of frost. The people stepped out of their tents and stared in absolute awe. They had never seen anything like this in their whole lives. They asked in Hebrew, "Manhu," meaning, "What is it?" aloud. From that day on, the wondrous bread was simply called manna. It tasted like wafers made with sweet, rich, golden honey. The heavens had opened to feed the starving, weak nation. But the crisis was not entirely over for the weak crowd. At Rephidim, they faced a lack of drinking water again. The sun beat down on the cracked, lifeless sandstone desert valley. The agonizing thirst returned with a fearful, dark force. Moses stood before a rock cliff, holding his wooden staff. The fate of millions rested heavily on his shoulders. Following divine orders, he raised his wooden staff high up. He struck the solid rock face with his remaining mighty strength. For a brief, terrifying second, nothing happened at all. The crowd held their dry breath, anticipating a failure. Suddenly, a deep, rumbling sound echoed from within the stone. A massive crack appeared, splitting the giant boulder open. A powerful stream of clear water violently burst forth. It roared like a magnificent, unstoppable river. The purest water cascaded down the red sandstone rocks. It splashed onto the faces of the absolutely stunned crowd. Cheers of joy and relief erupted across the valley. People rushed forward to drink, cupping their own trembling hands. They drank deeply until the water spilled down their dusty chins. The incredible freshness revived their broken spirits. Mothers washed the dusty faces of their crying infants. The dying livestock finally stood up to drink the stream. Moses watched them with a profound sense of deep gratitude. He knew that the hardest spiritual tests were yet to come. While they had food and water, survival required discipline. The Lord made a strict rule to test their newly found pure faith. Moses commanded them to gather enough for one day. No one was allowed to keep any for the next morning. The divine instruction was meant to teach total reliance. They had to trust the Creator would provide every dawn. But human greed is a deeply rooted and powerful flaw. Fear of starving made some people ignore the simple rule. In the dark shadows of their tents, they secretly hid the bread. They thought they could outsmart the mighty divine provider. When the sun rose the next day, a horrific smell filled the air. A foul stench of rotting garbage drifted from the hoarders' tents. They opened their clay jars and screamed in absolute bitter shock. The sweet manna had turned into a disgusting, rotten mess. Hundreds of writhing maggots crawled over the spoiled white flakes. The pure bread from heaven had decayed into a dark nightmare. What happens when we refuse to let go of selfish greed? The universe forces us to face our own toxic nature. Moses walked through the camp, his face stern and disappointed. He scolded the hoarders for their total lack of pure faith. The greedy ones wept as they dumped the rotting food in the sand. They realized that hoarding brought only suffering and shame. A profound realization swept over the refugees. True security was not found in overflowing pots. It was found in daily surrender to the Almighty hand. They had to let go of their Egyptian mindset of deep fear. The wilderness was no longer just a physical prison. It was a massive, open-air academy for their souls. Slowly, the chaotic mob began to act like a nation. They learned to share, to trust, and to look up instead of down. Many modern scholars argue this was a mental trial. Breaking the chains of the mind takes longer than escaping. Day after day, the wondrous miracles kept sustaining them. The manna fell like clockwork, and cool water just kept flowing. Their physical strength slowly returned to their tired bodies. The hollow cheeks filled out, and the young children began to laugh. Even the livestock regained their lost muscle and body weight. The shadow of death was finally lifted from the huge camp. With bellies full and thirst quenched, their great journey could continue. Moses gave the order to dismantle the sprawling, huge camp. Thousands of dusty tents were folded up in perfect unison. They packed their belongings with a renewed sense of shining hope. The massive crowd began to move like a giant, rolling wave. They marched forward, leaving the valley of Rephidim far behind. Their destination was not a green pasture or a rich city. They were heading toward a peak of jagged, dark, scary stone. Looming on the distant horizon was the sacred Mount Sinai. Its rugged summit pierced the sky like a massive, deadly spear. The atmosphere around the mountain felt heavy and electric. Even the dry desert wind seemed to whisper with hidden power. Up until now, their divine encounters had been quite subtle. Manna fell silently, and water flowed from a single rock. But Sinai was about to change the course of human history. The Creator would no longer hide behind a quiet cloud. The pure majesty of the Lord was ready to strike the ground now. A terrifying, earth-shaking event was about to unfold. Moses led his people to the very base of the tall mountain. He commanded them to wash their clothes and prepare their scared hearts. 3 intense holy days of strict cleansing rituals quickly began. The air grew heavy as a massive storm covered the dark peak. On the 3rd morning, the bright sky suddenly turned dark and pitch black. Deafening thunder rolled across the valley like a battle drum. Lightning tore through the dark clouds with blinding, terrifying flashes. The whole camp trembled in deep fear at the mighty cosmic display. A piercing sound like a massive ram's horn echoed from the summit. It grew louder until it shook the very ground they stood upon. Thick smoke poured from Mount Sinai like a giant erupting furnace. The Creator descended on the peak in a pillar of fire. The people stepped back, terrified by the overwhelming presence. They begged Moses to speak, fearing the divine voice would vanquish them. In the roaring fire, a mighty set of sacred laws was made here. It would become the moral anchor for future generations. 10 absolute commandments were carved in stone by God's mighty hand. They brought order to a wild world of ancient brutality. While Moses prayed on the peak, darkness brewed in the camp below. A golden idol was forged, threatening to ruin everything. We often judge the Israelites for losing their true belief. How often do we panic when our resources quickly dry up? The Sinai desert stripped away all their worldly illusions. It proved that human empires fall, but divine promises endure. The falling manna teaches us to embrace the present moment. We can't borrow tomorrow's grace for the heavy fears of today. Water from the rock shows salvation comes from unlikely places. The hardest stone shatters to release a life-giving stream of hope. Through extreme hunger and thirst, a wandering tribe was transformed here. They were forged in the furnace of the desert into a strong force. The long journey was far from over, and deadly tests awaited. But they had witnessed the power of their mighty, unseen king. They carried these strong memories as they marched into the unknown. The brutal desert scarred their bodies, but healed their broken souls. Look back at your life when everything seemed so hopelessly dark. Did a miracle arrive just when you were ready to break? Let the story of manna remind you to never lose your hope. The hardest trials prepare us for the greatest victories. The vast, empty wilderness could not defeat the human spirit. Faith turned a barren wasteland into a land of provision. As we leave the blazing dunes of Sinai, a shadow falls ahead. Moses will soon face his ultimate test against the gold idol. Join us in the next chapter as the mountain trembles with bright fire. The epic journey of Israel is only just beginning. The desert has spoken, and its harsh lessons echo through all time. Prepare for the law, where history forever changes its course. The vast and empty desert lay behind them as they marched forward to face their awesome, grand destiny. They had survived the ultimate, deadly test of human endurance in the harsh and unforgiving wild. Their fatigued but heavy footsteps echoed loudly against the towering Red Canyon mighty stone walls. The boundless sky above them finally cleared to reveal a brilliant and peaceful shade of clear, bright blue. A profound and holy silence replaced the chaotic, loud noise of the recent angry rebellion. Every single person carried the sweet memory of the wondrous falling, magical white manna. They remembered the cool, rushing water that powerfully burst from the solid, ancient desert rock. These unexpected divine interventions became the absolute foundation of their deep and pure faith. Moses walked proudly at the front, his glowing, weathered face reflecting a mighty and pure inner strength. He firmly knew that true and lasting freedom required immense discipline and profound, deep obedience. The brutal journey through the wilderness was designed to purify their weary, weak, and fearful, aching hearts. They were no longer miserable slaves, trembling under the cruel Egyptian master's heavy whip. They were transforming into a chosen nation, bound by a truly sacred and unbreakable promise. The dark and jagged peaks of the holy mountain grew much larger as they slowly moved ever closer to it. A giant, swirling pillar of pure white cloud guided their weary steps during the bright and burning daylight. They pitched their dusty tents one final time before the awful and terrifying grand summit of rock. The rugged stage was perfectly set for the absolute greatest revelation in human history. The desert taught them a harsh but vital lesson. Survival demanded pure faith, not selfish hoarding today. If you were starving in that brutal wasteland, would you trust a miracle or hoard the food? Tell us down below. If you enjoyed this epic journey into history, please like this video, share it, and subscribe for more.